So, what do you do when you have a SAD and you can't use your normal means of fixing the SAD because the show that you watch to get rid of the SADs is what is giving you the SAD, and who the decided to cancel Brooklyn Nine-Nine? No, I'm fine. Just start the thing.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine might not have that many awards to show for its 5-season run, but what it does have is an average of 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, seemingly endless memes, and one of the best teams of actors and writers ever to grace the small screen.
And it should come as no surprise that this show was created by Dan Gore and Michael Schur, who cut their teeth on The Office and perfected the art of the workplace comedy through Parks and Recreation.
But unlike its predecessors, Brooklyn Nine-Nine has a much less noticeable awkward period. From the pilot onwards, the cast was a well-oiled machine that kept improving every year.
It's tempting for me to talk about all 5 seasons, but at that point, you should just go watch the show. It's infinitely funnier and better than I could ever hope to be. So instead, we're going to talk about the main cast and how they're kind of the most feminist characters on TV, including the men. Hell, especially the men.
Jake Peralta, played by Andy Samberg. Yes, Andy Samberg. I know it might seem hard to think of the Lonely Island's frontman as anything other than that, but that's just part of what makes Jake so amazing.
At first glance, Jake is just another goofy man-child who kind of dopes his way through life. Another lovable misogynist in the vein of Han Solo, or Chris Pratt from Jurassic World. I don't care what his character name is, don't tell me.
But he's actually a really good detective, and what seems like immaturity is more of a general love for what he does. Jake is that kid who wanted to be a cop when he grew up and is delighted every day that he's living his dream, and he's pretty much the furthest thing from a misogynist.
He does not condescend, he does not mansplain, and he maintains a healthy respect for his female co-workers, even when he's in direct conflict or competition with them.
And over 5 seasons, he's grown to be more considerate and mature, developing a greater understanding of the world. And even at his most ridiculous, there are lines he is unwilling to see crossed, even going so far as to punch a former childhood hero after the man uses a homophobic slur.
So you might remember that I have a certain disdain for shows that treat snarking as friendship. Brooklyn Nine-Nine doesn't have that problem.
Jake isn't above a snarky one-liner, but they're always pretty clearly meant with love and a result of his goofy nature rather than trying to one-up and hurt people. And most of the time, everyone else is in on the joke. When he does cross any lines, people let him know, and he takes responsibility for his actions and works to make amends.
If I were going to give him any character counterpart on TV, it would probably be Andy Dwyer, except if Andy Dwyer actually became a cop and had, a lot more emotional baggage.
He's just as loyal, just as goofy, and just as lovable. Obviously, he's not perfect, but he's grown and changed for the better over the course of 5 seasons, and what flaws he does have, he knows he has them and why he does. We even later find out that Jake's father is a terrible, neglectful, irresponsible person who abandoned Jake and his mom, who was then stretched thin working to raise Jake, something that explains a lot about why Jake acts the way he does and why he has so much respect for the women in his life, while still sometimes being a little overprotective of them. Rosa Diaz, played by Stephanie Beatriz.
Rosa Diaz is about one pair of goggles away from being a steampunk science fiction heroine, and that is exactly why I love her.
Rosa is almost ludicrously strong and silent, but with a hair-trigger temper that makes her the scariest person in the precinct. But she's also got layers to her, in more ways than one, having formerly gone to ballet school and Catholic school, being genuinely afraid that she won't ever make real emotional connections, and dealing with the issues of her identity.
Like the actress who plays her, Rosa is bisexual. It was fanon up until she officially came out in season 5, and I'm not going to spoil how it happened, but it was great. I honestly think it was an even better coming out scene than Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. And I freaking love Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Rosa's tough exterior makes her moments of honesty and vulnerability all the more powerful. She has a firm belief in solidarity and loyalty to her friends and her profession, even if she doesn't always show it.
She's like the perfect fusion of Andy Dwyer and April Ludgate. And she even has a puppy!
I've only had Arlo for a day and a half, but if anything happened to him, I would kill everyone in this room and then myself.
Same, Rosa. Same.
And she has basically zero tolerance for sexist assumptions or behaviors, and while it would be easy to fall into the trap of making the overreaction be the joke, the humor comes mainly from her continued stoicism and other people's realizations that they've made a mistake in angering her. but when it comes to her friends, she is unfailingly supportive, even if she has an odd way of showing it.
Look, she's just a badass, okay?
And we're going to stick a pin in her for now, because there's more that I want to talk about, but I need to cover a few other things first. Terry Jeffords, played by Terry Crews.
Yes, that Terry Crews. That Terry Crews.
Hello, ladies. Is what a dummy would say!
That Terry Crews. Yep.
There are 3 things you should know about Terry Jeffords, the character. 1, he's a fitness nut stemming primarily from some body image issues in his formative years. 2, he's an amazing dad, not just to his adorable daughters, but to the entire squad. And 3, he has absolutely no toxic masculinity whatsoever.
By which I mean Terry has no problem admitting what he likes regardless of how it's perceived. Yogurt, Walls, Elizabeth Moss, this super nerdy book series called The Skyfire Cycle. Incidentally, something which sparks off several commentaries about the blatant toxic masculinity, misogyny, and lack of diversity in fantasy fandom as a whole.
But more than that, Terry is the perfect example of how the show sidesteps and subverts what could easily lapse into stereotypes while also having fun with him. Because again, Terry is Terry Crews.
It's me! Goodbye!
Allow me to demonstrate with a different attempted subversion. You might know Grizzin.com from 30 Rock.
Grizz.com, thank you for pretending to be bouncers.
Maybe someday we'll live in a world where you ask us to pretend to be scientists.
Now, I really do like 30 Rock, but this joke feels kind of weak. It's just, hey, this is kind of racist before we go back to Liz and Jack's shenanigans. Now let's compare it to a scene from Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
I need someone to fill out a lineup. Will you be Scary Terry?
Oh, I love being Scary Terry. He says what regular Terry's thinking.
This is taking too long! I'm gonna miss the farmer's market!
I find this joke has more substance because it's taking a specific expectation and flipping it. You might have expected Scary Terry to be all gangsta and tough and stereotypical, but instead it's just regular Terry, only louder.
And I would be remiss if I didn't at least briefly address Mumu, the season 4 episode that focused on police brutality and racial profiling. While out searching for one of his daughter's toys, Terry is confronted by another cop, one who perceives him as a threat because of his appearance, specifically his race. This episode deals with the systemic problem on multiple fronts and is able to give mature commentary and offer compassion to the viewers without compromising humor and trending into very special episode territory.
Good for you, Terry. Have some yogurt.
I love yoga.
Amy Santiago, played by Melissa Fumero.
Amy. The nerd who makes Hermione Granger look basic.
In the first season, Amy is introduced as the most apparent foil among Jake's peers. She is exceptionally by the book and hyper-prepared, armed with well-organized binders and the determination typical of girls who grew up with a legion of older brothers.
Amy's life goal is to be a captain, and this is where I want to take out that Rosa pin we made.
Amy gets worked up when Rosa is offered a captain's post in another precinct, and after showing her just how boring that job would actually be, Rosa points out that as women in a male-dominated profession, the two of them have to have each other's back.
And this is actually reflective of real life in a way. Both Melissa Fumero and Stephanie Beatriz went in to audition for Amy with the expectation that only one Latina woman was going to be cast. Because even in shows that are generally considered diverse, there's usually only one minority of each.
But both of them were cast, and as a result, the show avoids the trap of having only one of them serve as their only representation of Latinx people. But back to Amy. That Hermione Granger comparison I made was fully intentional, as the show has been pretty clear that Amy loves Harry Potter and identifies with Hermione, and that's part of what makes her dynamic with Jake work.
The two of them are both very intelligent, accomplished detectives, but their styles could not be more different, and that is where their conflict comes from.
Their relationship is kind of fascinating, because it's compared to a boy pulling on the pigtails of the girl he likes, but since Jake and Amy are on equal footing, it doesn't feel creepy or like he thinks he's entitled to her. There's always an inherent respect between the two of them, and that serves as the foundation for their relationship in all things.
Amy's gender is only ever treated as a detriment by sexist pigs like The Vulture. And if you want to know who the vulture is, watch the show.
Amy's faults come from her personality, her teacher's pet attitude, her nerdy habits, and her conflict with the rest of the cast, but those can just as easily become her strengths and be what makes her endearing. And they're always what make her funny.
That's the mark of good comedic writing.
Charles Boyle, played by Joe Latrulio.
Oh, Boyle. Sweet, sweet Boyle. Arguably the most flanderized character on the show, and yet still somehow pathetically lovable.
Of all the characters on the show, Boyle is the one who's had the most awkward development. He started out with kind of a creepy crush on Rosa that bordered on stalking, but that was toned down when it became clear that it wasn't working, and the writers subtly redesigned him to be different.
And I want to be clear, I mean that in the best way possible, because Boyle has a lot of feelings, you guys.
Unfortunately, he also has quite a bit of a foot and mouth disorder, as he has a tendency to overshare and go from 0 to 60 in a heartbeat. It's called going full Boyle. His romantic crush on Rosa kind of mutated into his hero worship of Jake, which waffles back and forth between adorable, healthy friendship between two guys and, wow, Charles, take it down about, 20 notches.
And then there are his hobbies, which are, interesting?
Like Terry, Charles has no problem enjoying things that aren't considered traditionally masculine, like Nancy Drew books and gourmet cooking. He's a total foodie, but his palate runs a lot grosser than avocado toast.
And that is saying a lot because avocado toast is green mud on dry bread. It's disgusting, and you can't change my mind about this. Don't try to.
It gets a lot easier to see why he's like this when we meet the rest of his family. The Boyles are a loving, non-confrontational clan with deeply rooted traditions, and that made Charles into an overly enthusiastic people-pleaser.
But he knows he has this problem, and he's grown more assertive over the years, but isn't any less lovable for it.
Boyle would do anything for a friend, and that's what makes him so lovable despite his quirks and his failings. We should all be so lucky as to have a friend like him.
Just, don't let him cook for you. At least not without knowing what's on the menu first.
Gina Linetti, played by Chelsea Peretti.
Every time I watch this show, I thank Beyonce that Gina Linetti does not have superpowers, because she'd probably be a bomb-ass villain.
The only civilian in the main cast, Gina is kind of an amoral narcissist, yet she has an allure that makes it impossible to ignore her.
Gina once referred to herself as the Paris of people, and I would have to agree, but you have to remember that in addition to the historical monuments and museums and the fashion, Paris is also filled with smokers, annoying tourists, shady back alleys, and pickpockets.
A lot of stuff she says can go over the line, but it's just as easily going to be meme-worthy because, well, she's played by Chelsea Peretti.
Literally the Emmy to Jordan Peele's Oscar.
And even if her behavior can be horrifying at times, there is something to be said for the boundless self-confidence with which Gina moves through life. She can be surprisingly insightful when it's least expected, endlessly creative, and even helpful at times, provided she likes the person.
She and Jake were childhood friends growing up, so she's less heinous to him than she is to Amy or to Boyle, and she knows to fear Rosa, but even so, narcissist.
The English language cannot fully capture the depth and complexity of my thoughts, so I'm incorporating emoji into my speech to better express myself. Winky face.
And stop playing this inane garbage. It's embarrassing.
Say it to my face.
I did. You were looking at your phone.
Oh, cool, my bad.
I was thinking how I would make the perfect American president based upon my skill set, dance ability, and bloodlust. It's not fair. I founded the group and now they want to kick me out just because I missed 8 rehearsals in a row?
Honestly, Gina's appeal is just going to vary from person to person, so why don't we move along? I do have one more person to talk about before I set you free.
Raymond Holt, played by Andre Brower.
Oh, Captain, my Captain! Sorry, I've, still got a little Dead Poet Society stuck in me.
Holt is the no-nonsense, deep-voiced captain of the 9-9, and he has 2 very good reasons to be that.
You know that saying that a woman must work twice as hard to get half as much recognition as a man? That's the same concept that was applied to Holt, except he's black, And he's gay.
Holt's sexuality shapes who he is without defining him, as most of his comedy comes from his stoic nature clashing with the other characters, whether it's making Amy squirm as she tries to get his approval,
It's because he's trying to teach her about her own self-worth and not relying on the approval of others.
or pushing Jake to be more grounded and serious, or practicing emotional vulnerability with the similarly guarded Rosa, or helping Terry as one black man on a force to another. Holt lives every day with the systemic prejudices against him, and it's apparent in how he treats his squad that he both wants and expects better from them.
He also has a husband named Kevin and a corgi named Cheddar, and he loves both of them, and it's adorable!
He's gotten more than a few comparisons to a robot, and he considers that a compliment since he so rarely raises his voice above his authoritative timbre, but that makes the moments of changed pitch all the funnier. And those moments have become more and more frequent as he has let the squad into his heart over the last 5 years.
The full bullpen!
Season 1 Holt never would have done that. And truly, he is the metaphorical stepdad who has come to be a part of the family in every way. And since he probably would think I have talked about him more than enough already, let's wrap this up.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine deserved more attention than it got in the 5 years of its run. It has an uncanny ability to balance comedy with genuinely heartfelt and serious moments, and a willingness to dig deep into what could have become a dull cycle of people throwing barbs at each other disguised as comedy. Instead, the writers, the cast, the showrunners, everyone dug deep in order to create something bigger than a show. They made a family.
My super weird family with 2 black dads and 2 Latina daughters and 2 white sons and Gina and I don't know what you are, some strange giant baby.
If you haven't seen this show yet, go check it out right now. And if you have, I ask you to join me in raising a glass. To the 9-9.
To the 9-9.
I just wish we could have more time. Wait, really? Seriously? Oh my god, the internet can still be a force for good! Wow! This calls for the Amy Santiago dance of celebration to take us out!
Oh no, it's happening! Woo!
Merci beaucoup for watching, everyone. If you like what I do, please be sure to like, leave comments, and share this video, and to subscribe to help my channel reach a wider audience, as well as following me on Facebook and Twitter.
If you're feeling generous and you haven't been contracted into the Nutriboom pyramid scheme, you can support me on Patreon, where you can show up in my credits, be considered for cameos, vote on Lady of the Month, and request future episodes. And speaking of which, Karen, what do we have next on the docket? Really? Well then. I have a disfigured opera impresario in a basement to find so I can ask him to teach me how to sing, and you guys have a TV show to watch, so, à bientôt.